Good evening, everyone, and good morning to Shreelakshmi and Dr. Glenn, who are sitting on the other side of the world and attending this international forum. At the outset, let me thank Professor Hemlata Talesra and the team of Rajasthan Council of Educational Administration and Management and the affiliate institutions for initiating such a wonderful lecture series. I consider this as a platform to share our ideas and our experiences. You know, sharing is learning. And this learning at the global level is possible because of the technology that we are using. And I have with me my doctoral student, Shreelakshmi Subbaswamy, who is a senior UGC fellow working at the Center for Advanced Studies in Baroda University. And I am proud to inform here that she has been awarded the Fulbright Doctoral Research Fellowship and currently working in the University of Albany, especially working in the area of education for global citizenship. And therefore, we thought she can bring the voices and the experiences of United States, the curriculum, the transaction, and also the perspectives of the practitioners into this forum to understand the global practices. Friends, it was in 2006 and 7 when I was the fellow of a Swedish institute invited by the University of Stockholm as a visiting professor to work in the International Comparative Education Institution. Understanding about the world educational scenarios, the global competencies, and a global order of looking into education and the development was instilled in the mind. Then, with Erasmus Mundus support in 2012, we initiated a platform called Education for Global Citizenship with the Aarhus University in Denmark, with the after schoolings in Denmark. After schooling is a concept where after the 9 years of schooling, students will be able to stay for 1 year to understand the educational scenario in the Denmark. So friends, I would like to present some of my experiences with global citizenship, what it is, and what kind of impact it makes on the educational ecosystem at large. And my scholar will be talking about certain pedagogical processes and the research base and how we as educators can really integrate into our educational processes. Friends, many changes have taken place in the previous century. And of course, in the beginning of the 21st century. Whenever we talk about education for all, education for sustainable development, Millennium Development Goals, the 21st century skills, all these things were actually talking about the kind of changes that are happening in the system and alarming the educational processes to equip themselves to fine-tune the learners and prepare them for the 21st century. Friends, when I talk in terms of globalization, in the world, whether you like it, you dislike it, that was something that happened, and we are all experiencing that. When the economic liberalization, globalization, privatization that took place, the popular LPG reforms, with the General Agreement of Trade and Treaty of 1994, There are certain things that happened in the world, and these things have given a lot of scope for the individuals to operate at the global level. So whether we talk about the cross-border supply, you talk about the consumption abroad, we talk about commercial presence in the global markets, or the international mobility, that have seen to great extent, and India is not an exception. So the technological innovations that happened, the liberalization, globalization, and privatization policies, and the political will, all these things created a kind of ecosystem that elevated from a local perspective to a global perspective. So friends, in this context, education for global citizenship is something which is a value addition to educational processes, because it highlights about the individual responsibilities at the global platforms. It makes the learner to realize its responsibilities to exercise their role as a leader to address certain pertinent problems that we are facing today. So friends, let me talk about the scenario that we have in India today. The Global Migration Report 2020, which talks about the large number of Indian diaspora living in the foreign countries. And for your information, we have about 18 million people living outside the country. And this is the world's largest diaspora population. And the second goes to Mexico, which is about 11.8 million diaspora. And the third place goes to China, which is about the 10.7 million. So what I mean to say is the Indian population is living in different countries. And they are actually migrated to different countries for various reasons. Probably the employment opportunities, probably the educational facilities, probably the standard of living, the quality of life. So what I mean to impress to you at this juncture is that we have a large number of international mobility that has been taking place from India. And if you see the international study abroad programs, as per the report of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, we have about 8 lakhs Indian students studying in various countries at various levels of the program. So if you keep all these things at one side, and the very ambitious National Education Policy 2020 that we have now, where the vision talks about making India a global knowledge power, and also creating a system of education that can cater to the needs, not only for the local demands, for the global demands. Thereby, we exercise a leadership at the world order. Friends, in this context, we need to understand what kind of education that we need to have, and how this global citizenship as a component can be an additional value to what we offer to individuals. We have the word citizenship here. The word citizenship basically talks about geographical boundary, the identity of an individual to a particular nation. It talks about the nationality. It has a certain legal framework. If you become a citizen of a particular country, you are entitled for certain rights, certain responsibilities, certain opportunities, certain obligations, certain norms, certain code of conduct. But when you add this global citizenship, probably it goes beyond the legal framework, because the global is something which doesn't have a national identity. It essentially talks about the communion of the human beings at large in the global world. It is a feeling of community of human beings to protect themselves and to create a harmonious society, and thereby the peace and harmony can be well established. Therefore, when you see a global citizenship, it is much beyond than the word citizenship that it conveys. It has no legal boundaries, as in terms of you talk about the rights by being an Indian citizen. I have certain fundamental rights, and I have the privilege to make use of these rights and live in a dignified condition. Therefore, when you try to understand the word citizenship, it essentially carries three important what you call norms. One is the solidarity. The solidarity of the nation essentially talks about the unity, a feeling of the nation and the nation first, a kind of a feeling that individuals holds. And the second important characteristic is the civic duty. By being member of a particular nation, we hold certain kind of responsibilities to perform to maintain the sovereignty of the particular country. And the third one is the civic engagement. The civic engagement talks about making use of our competencies for nation building. Friends, if I try to apply these fundamental principles of citizenship into the global context, I'm taking the local context to a global context. We are trying to understand the world is a global village. Rather, it is the Indian wisdom that we hold with us. The Vasudhaika Kutumbakam, the concept. The whole world is a global village. And thereby, our actions, our thoughts, our feelings directly, indirectly influence the global practices. And I'm sure we have been experiencing that in our day-to-day life situations now. So, if you want to understand the global scenario, we need to understand the complexities. We need to understand the paradoxes that human beings are facing. Whether you talk in terms of value deterioration, in terms of disturbing the peace and harmony, in terms of ecological imbalances, or in terms of the health, environmental issues. And we understand that these issues cannot be addressed by individuals. These issues need to be addressed by people collectively. The collective ideas and the collective efforts are very much essential. And thereby, what happens? We need to prepare our individuals, our learners, right from the beginning to understand their role, not only at the local level, but also at the global level in addressing these issues in a very important way. And thereby, we also see certain kinds of changes happening when you are experiencing globalization in a larger frame of reference. There are few global cities which were emerged. You know, for example, you have a New York City, you have London, you have Mumbai, you have Singapore and Tokyo. I'm giving few examples. And these cities have emerged over a period of time as a global cities. What does it mean? It means there is a wider scope for the cross-border commercial aspects, the cross-border communication business, economic activities, and many other. And because of the evolution of these global cities, you also have the mobility of people from one place to another. And this mobility has created a global community. And the global community is the combination of the varied cultures that people bring and value in their life. And thereby, it cannot be a challenge for individual to equip and accommodate such kind of social systems. Therefore, if you see in New York City, an absolute global city in terms of Asian Americans, you talk about the Euro Americans, the Middle East Americans, and how they are living in a harmonious situation. And that competency which is required and which is going to be more in demand in the future to come. And therefore, we as educationists seriously think about what kind of education that can really equip our learners who are going to be the future leaders, not only at the local level, but the global level, to exercise in the global working context. Friends, the another important thing that happened is about the global competencies. So today, when we talk in terms of global competencies, we are not really neglecting the local demands and local value systems. We are actually making use of our local competencies to address the global issues. That's how our Honorable Prime Minister talks about globalization. Use the word globalization. It is the local and the global and the fine mix of how individuals can carry forward their local wisdom to address the global issues and the global knowledge. So when I talk about the third important aspect, the education, we discussed about the globalization, how it happened. We discussed about the characteristic of the citizenship, and the education for global citizenship is something which is a very, very interesting and very hopeful activity. Why? Because education must be a visionary and a future-oriented. In the face of stunning scientific and technological innovations and change, unprecedented socio-economic challenges and opportunities, surprising socio-political reforms, and amazing cultural awakening, education need to be restructured. And to restructure the education, we must bring the global challenges, issues, and ideas into our classroom practices. And thereby, individuals will understand not only the local issues, but the global challenges and realize their responsibility as a global leader. And that is the focus of the education for global citizenship that we are talking about. Now I hand over my student Shreelakshmi Subbaswamy to continue, and then I'll come to sum it up. Over to Shreelakshmi.
Thank you very much, sir. At the outset, I thank all the organizers for inviting me, and I'm very delighted to be here. And it's actually 9 o'clock here in New York, and it's kind of a reminder that we stay in a globalized world. And if we have the shared vision, will to communicate and connect with each other, we can definitely make a difference towards global citizenship education and sustainable development. So today's topic, when Professor Pushpanadham sir gave me an opportunity, I said, this is my topic. This is the research which I have always been in. Almost a half a decade of my research, I have invested in understanding the nuances, the complexities of global citizenship education. And here, as a Fulbright scholar, I'm exploring how the practitioners perceive global citizenship education and how they implement in their classrooms. And as a person, also, this topic is very close to me because I grew up in a small town in Karnataka, Hassan, where I have seen how the formal, informal education has actually transformed me into a global citizen. So, in this background, this topic for me is very close in terms of my research. And as a researcher, I really felt that I need to respond in terms of contributing to the knowledge domain, in terms of what kind of curricular models, what kind of pedagogical practices really foster citizenship education, and especially global citizenship education, and how education systems needs to organize themselves with a new set of values and principle. When we look at the sustainable development goals, we come to realize that business by usual is not really enough. The way we have been perpetuating the inequalities through systems, through education systems, has to be relooked at. We need a really big purpose and a change in rethinking of the aims of education. When you look at education in, maybe during the Millennium Development Goals, the major thrust was on the access to education. We see that it has moved from access to quality. And now with GEFI, with Sustainable Development Goal, and also the Global Education First Initiative, which was launched in 2012, the third pillar of education is global citizenship. So clearly at an international level, at all organizational level, global citizenship education is pronounced as important, and it has to really be geared up and embraced in all education system. And we happen to see that how this model, the global citizenship model, has come into a bigger picture, and how this has been validated as used as a currency to transform the world to a sustainable place, to a place which is more prosperous and peaceful. So with Professor Pushpanadham sir's presentation, it is very well established that the purpose and urgency of educating for global citizenship. And in my presentation, I will be sharing with you some of my empirical research experience, also give you certain framework on how we can actually integrate education for global citizenship in our systems, be it school education system or be it higher education system. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and then we can proceed with that. Should that be okay?
Yeah, kindly go forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So let us first think about what is our target? What is the target which we have right in front of us? We all know the number 4 target in SGD is quality education. In number 4 target, the 4.7, which specifically prescribes global citizenship education at all levels. It says by 2030, we don't have much time. It's very soon. By 2030, we have to ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, those education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture of peace, non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So let me tell you, this is one of the messiest targets because there are multiple things which are interdependent and interrelated. And this requires a new way of thinking. And the conceptualization of purpose of education is not just to prepare our students to the job market, to prepare students to compete in the global economy, but to prepare our students to live together. I remember Dulles' report, which came in 1996 from the UNESCO, which actually talks about the 4 pillars of learning, which one of them was learning to live together. And now global citizenship education, if we look at it as a concept or a theory, it is actually bringing those spirits back into action. So we really have a huge and a very ambitious target ahead of us. And we as a fraternity, education fraternity, be it researchers, scholars, educators, practitioners, and even students, we have a huge responsibility towards our countries, towards our world as a whole. So let us see what are the working definitions. So when we normally try to develop a curriculum or a pedagogy around a concept, we always try to look at what is the working definition so that it can guide us through our processes of developing a curriculum and a pedagogy, and most importantly, the ecosystem of educational landscape. So the working definition, which is prescribed by UNESCO, goes like this, and this is also in alignment with OECD and other platforms like Oxfam. Global citizenship education nurtures respect for all, building a sense of belongingness to one common humanity and helping learners become responsible and active global citizens. Global citizenship education aims to empower individuals to take active role in confronting and resolving global challenges and to play their part in the creation of a more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secular world. So if you really look at this, and also as Professor mentioned, the action element in global citizenship education is underscored at all levels. So it's not just to teach children about few global issues, globalization, but actually connect core to them how they can actually take the actions at the global level. I mean, if even when we think about these kids, how their actions are actually connecting to the broader ecosystem, that is something which is important for all of us to look at. And then if we look at the learning domains, it's not just the cognitive domain which has been focused in citizenship education. There are three learning domains which is being pronounced at an international level. One is the cognitive domain. We already know that 21st century skills, the cognitions are very important for students to make a sense of the complexities of the world. Be it disciplinary or transdisciplinary knowledge has to be in place so that we can equip students to a better understanding of the world. And next is the socio-emotional domain of citizenship, global citizenship education. It actually embraces the values, attitudes, social skills that enable students to develop effectively, and it actually helps them to connect emotionally to these challenges and problems. So when I am in the field work, when I talk to these teachers, what they say is first thing, Shreelakshmi, is to connect students emotionally. When they're connected socially and emotionally to a concept or a challenge, they have the will, they have the motivation to act towards it, to respond towards it. And mostly in our siloed thinking, in our compartmentalized way of thinking, we tend to forget to attach the socio-emotional strand to our teaching. So in global citizenship education, it is very important for us to build in the values, build in the emotional part of the issues or the developments around us to the teaching learning in our classrooms. So the next aspect, as we already have established, is the behavioral aspect. Okay, we have developed a knowledge domain, we have connected them to a socio-emotional aspect of it. Now what? The students should really be able to respond to it in a way that they can make a difference in their own community. Practical application of knowledge is very important. This is not a new thing at all. Practical application has been since since our 1992 framework, whatever we are doing now, we have been talking about application of knowledge. But in global citizenship education, what really underscores is the ability to see connection between subjects, ability to have a connect and have a community engagement in the society is something which we are strongly looking at. It is not just applying their knowledge to solve a mathematical problem or a social studies problem, but to actually go into the community and engage in the community with all the stakeholders to make a difference. So these are the three main learning domains which we need to focus when we are planning or when we are embracing the whole idea or whole model of global citizenship education. So the very obvious question is, who is a global citizen? What makes someone a global citizen? There are a number of perspectives towards it. There are a number of narratives to it, but one of those things which strongly talks is the global competence. So the competence is not just the acquisition of knowledge, skills, or attitudes, but it is a combination of knowledge, skills, attitudes. It's how students mobilize these aspects so that they can solve some issue which is there in front of them. It might be as simple as understanding a certain difference, why somebody is reflecting or responding to a situation in a different way. Can the knowledge which is being developed in the school system, in the formal education, help the students to understand the world in a more better way? Because we all know that the world which we live in is not black and white, simple, straightforward way. It has its own complexities, and just one knowledge domain or one set of skills are not really sufficient to cater to these challenges and development. So when we talk about who is a global citizen, there are different frameworks, as you can see. There are different frameworks, as you can see, that it talks more about how we connect to the global and the intercultural issues, how we can understand the world in different perspectives, how we can take actions. So coming to the clear definitions or clear implications of who is a global citizen, the student should be able to know and also take informed decision. And in today's world, our students are really informed by various factors, be it social media, their peer, their parents. So they do not really have an information which is credible and valid. So an important skill which we need to develop is to take informed decision. And that doesn't come just by giving out some information about globalization or international understanding, but to really involve in discourses, debates, and also conversations which actually make them realize what is credible knowledge and how they can take informed decisions in their own environment. And the next aspect is students should be able to consider global problems, and they have to behave in a way that they are not just considering from their point of view. Normally when, especially in America, this is something which I've seen very prominently. When we are talking in a discussion, especially when we have people from different parts of the world, like China, Korea, from the Nordic countries, from Canada, we really have that grit and resilience to listen to their perspectives and actually share a common vision. So, and even at times when we have disagreements, we should be able to understand how we can communicate our ideas across. So the next point about who is a global citizen is someone who has the ability, is someone who has honed that skill of communication to express his beliefs or her beliefs to a person who doesn't hold the same belief. That is something which is very important, and which we call it as intercultural understanding or interdimensional understanding, where we try to build in these values and skills right from the school age. And the next aspect is the global competent students need to create a positive change at their own level. So we have this organization called NY Kids at Albany. So what we do is to bring in students of different age groups, and then we put them together to solve certain global issues. So right now they're focusing on the gender inequality and LGBTQ, because they figured out that these are the issues which are really pressing in their teens' lives. So this is something which brings them together to a common core understanding, and they're making difference through publications, they're making difference through campaigns. So normally we think the students cannot really make a change or a positive difference, but when we look at a broader aspect, when we see them in action, it is really possible. That it's just that we need to give them a right curricular experience, right pedagogical practices, so that they can actually evolve into change makers. So coming to the next aspect of it, so what is the learning framework which we can look at? As you can see that this is a very general learning framework. It's not just if you can see that the students is influenced by parents, teachers, peer, and community. So it's very important to embrace all stakeholders in global citizenship education. It's not just what happens within the walls of classroom, but it actually should bring the values, bring the knowledge from all the domains of students' life. And then that's, moving ahead, I would go on to introduction of transdisciplinary curricular model. So what is transdisciplinary curricular model? Before I go into it, I would like to give what is exactly we are dealing with in a general perspective. So when we look at K-12 curricular system, we look at sciences, math, languages as separate entities, separate categories, wherein the interaction between these two disciplines are to minimal. And the students who learn physics laws or mathematical theorems are not able to connect the dots between these two subjects. And when we look at the global challenges, or even to understand the global world, these just mere disciplinary knowledge is not enough. We need to really combine, we need to really connect the dots between disciplinary subjects and disciplinary skills to understand the world at first, and then tackle what we can do. So the idea of transdisciplinary curricular model is to blur the borders of discipline. I'm sure that you might be thinking that this is a huge task in hand, but I have been working with IB school system, wherein they have developed transdisciplinary thematic approaches to bring in the cross-disciplinary engagements and pedagogies. So it is important for us to adopt not living behind disciplinary models, but also to bring in the element of transdisciplinary curricular models. To give a very short examples, it's when we talk about physics principles, we don't really teach it in the silo, thinking more that okay, these are the principle and this is how it has to be applied to solve a physics problem. But can that same principle or a law which you have learned in physics or math can be applied to solve a global issue, maybe a climate change? So that's something linkage which we'll have to start developing, and then using the disciplinary knowledge and skills to actually tackle the problems of the local, the regional level, and also the global level. So when it comes to pedagogy, we tend to think that there has to be a very new pedagogy, which is mostly like not existed at all. But we all are mistaken. These are the pedagogies which we already know. The pedagogies which we talk about, critical pedagogy, which comes from Aristotle thinking, and this pedagogy actually has to create new value, reconcile tensions and dilemmas, and most importantly, the pedagogy should actually make the students to take action and make them realize the moral obligation towards the greater world. And when we talk about reconciling tensions and dilemmas, I want to focus on this particular element, because we see that there are polarization in ideas. We see that there are tension between a lot of belief system. So how does this pedagogy, how this construction of knowledge in the classrooms, in the school community, help them make a mid ground? So that is something which is important. And there are a number of instructional strategies which I have mentioned here. There are structured debates, organized discussion, current events discussion, and playing games. I would put some of the links on the chat. Maybe you can use it for your reference. MGEIP, which you might all know, have come up with a really interesting platform using games to teach global citizenship education to both teachers and students. So this is woven around the pedagogy of storytelling and games. This is very interesting in a way that they have taken very common cultural instances to teach about migration, about climate change, about gender equality, and many other areas. So it's important for us to really understand what are these instructional strategies which can help promote these ideas. And coming to the assessment of global competencies, now that we know that we have a transdisciplinary model and how can pedagogies foster to it, we need to really look about how can we know that we have achieved in a way that our children are really moving towards global citizenship. This is a very robust, and sometimes it gets into the complexities, because normally when we see the assessments, it is mostly high-stake testing, which tests the knowledge domain of it. But when we see global citizenship, it actually embraces behavioral domain and the socio-emotional domain. How are we going to assess it? That is something which we really need to understand. And what are the assessment tools we have? And another project which I'm involved here at Albany with Professor Benevit is from the FCU, where we are looking at developing measurement frameworks to assess global competencies in Asia Pacific region. So a very interesting thing which we all found out was there is different conceptualization of global competencies in the Asia Pacific when compared to the Western societies. So we are trying to build in a very holistic framework of measurement, so that we can actually measure the action element. And to give a little background about the work which I'm doing here, when I'm engaging with teachers, I'm trying to understand what is the action element which they are looking at for global citizenship. And very interestingly, the action element is varying from preschool to middle school to high school to higher education. So it is very important for us to contextualize what we really mean by global citizen. What are the actions they need to take, so that we can plan our transdisciplinary curriculum and the pedagogies around the action elements, so that the students, by the end of the intervention of the curriculum, they're able to take certain actions, or maybe to take informed decision. And we all know that the role of teachers is the most important, not just in one part of education, but in terms of building that construction of knowledge. Normally when we see teachers, they are seen someone as deliverers of knowledge, someone who has a content to deliver and who is going to the classrooms and delivering it. But we see that this is not working at all. The teacher has to take the role of change agents. How he or she construct the knowledge with children becomes very important. I'll give a very interesting example from one of the studies, empirical evidences which I've been looking at. This is from Argentina. The study was conducted somewhere during the Peronist regime. So this was a totalitarian regime. And then there was a lot of changes in the curriculum and the education system in that area. And the study actually looked at the notebooks which the teachers used to construct knowledge within this classroom. What is interesting to see is that how the teachers resisted the totalitarian regime, how the teachers kind of challenged the macro political structure which they had. So which brings me to tell you that the teachers, if they have the will, if they have the informed decision, they really can bring in the changes, even though when their macro dynamics, be it the dynamics of their district, be it the dynamics of their own school, they can really make a difference inside their classroom if they are willing to embrace the ideas and values of global citizenship. And the role of students is very important, as we all know that students are not just mere receivers and deliverers or producers of information, but they're agents of learning, agents of change. So this idea has to be inculcated right from the very young age. So when I go into preschools, I have seen all of the teachers teach them everything, tell everything to the students to do this, not to do that. Of course, it is a good way of doing it, but we need to really embrace this agency. Are we really, making children take their own decisions? Maybe it's not a cultural thing. When I see the difference between India and America, here people are very individualistic. They really value the decisions of an individual. And maybe coming from India, we are a collective society wherein we give importance for the collective identity, collective values. Both of us is important. But when we look at making informed decisions, when we look at how we are empowering or equipping students to take their own decisions in a globalized world, we need to embrace this idea of agency of learning right from early years, not just when they come to high school or to higher education. Right from the early year, we need to bring that agency and the power of decision making among children. I can give you many examples of how global citizenship education is practiced in different parts of the world. But one model which has been prominent and which is promising is the whole school approach. Generally, when we look at the empirical evidences, we see that the global citizenship education or the education for sustainable development is taken as a standalone subject. It is considered as one separate subject and taught through and maybe assessed. But the best practice would be to embrace it in terms of a whole school approach, integrating right from the vision and mission and philosophy of the school to the pedagogical practices, to the leadership decisions, and to the whole ethos of the school system. So this is something which we really have to think about. It is not just in terms of changing the curriculum. It's not just in terms of bringing new materials into the classroom. How are we bringing these ideas of global citizenship, bringing the ideas of solidarity, bringing the ideas of creating new values, sustainable values into the whole school system becomes very important. I'll give an example of what happens if we do not have this whole school approach. So one of the schools which I was visiting here had a beautiful curriculum around sustainable development. It was partly an inclusion in environmental studies, and as a whole of a school, I really couldn't find out the sustainable practices because there was so much of wastage of water, huge amount of use of plastic. There were no green lifestyles. So when I was discussing with the teachers and I was trying to understand how do you really see this paradoxes or kind of irony that you're teaching students in a siloed way in your classrooms about curriculum, about sustainable development, about climate change. As a school, as a whole, the practices, the sustainable practices or the citizenship practices are not echoed in the school system or the school ethos. So then there becomes a disjuncture. Then we see that the action element of global citizenship is not really met to the right of its spirit. It becomes very important to embrace these ideas in a much more broader and deep way as a whole school approach. And the next thing, it's a very common thing for all the educators and researchers is, does learning happen only in the classrooms? Does learning happen only within the scope of the textbooks, within the scope of the curriculum? That's not true. Learning happens everywhere. Ubiquitous learning is something which we have to be cognizant about. Learning happens when they're out of school, with the parents, with the peer. Learning happens life-wide and lifelong. So we really need to understand how do we bridge this gap between non-formal, formal, and informal education, which brings me to another domain or model of community engagement. We really need to involve the stakeholders of education, not just the immediate stakeholders, parents, but also a broader community to actually bring these ideas into a broader realm of things. If at all we think that it only happens inside the formal education system, we are mistaken. So the idea of global citizenship or education for global citizenship has to be pervasive, and it has to be moved across life-wide and lifelong. So coming to this point, I would like to share one of the forms with you. Maybe you can fill it up later. Before we get into the main strategies, main 6 strategies to advance global education in our school systems or any formal education system, we need to really understand what are the factors which are acting as barriers or challenges. So I'm going to leave this in a chat. You can, it's more like a self-reflection, which will help you to understand in what areas you can develop global citizenship, and what are the major challenges you're facing in your own context. So I have compiled this from my work as a researcher, and also taking account of few frameworks. There are majorly 6 strategies for advancing global education in your school. First thing is to make the case. So when I tell make the case, it is to convincing each and every stakeholder about the purpose and importance of global education. Why I say it is important is we live in a neoliberal world, and education is not excluded. It is in fact more influenced. When I say why is it influenced, we are really looking at education as a tool to help students to get into the global market, just that. But we're really not looking into the depth of learning, depth of the purpose of life, and also to develop as a holistic person. So it's very important for the school leaders, for all the stakeholders, to really understand why it is important for the school and how they can involve these ideas into the vision and mission. And the next step would be to define success. So what should students know and be able to do as a result? So you should have a clear-cut learning outcomes or learning objectives. I would say more of outcomes, because when we look at outcomes, we really know how do we reach it. If we look at objectives, yes, this is one way of doing it. But if we are able to define what is that we are really looking at, who is a global citizen, what students should be able to do and know, if we are able to define in a clear-cut manner, we should be able to advance global education in our school systems. And the next thing is to make strategic upgrades. So the most important strategic upgrade would be to really look at curricular models which we have in school. So normally in India, what happens is that we have a state board, international board, or a school board. We bring that, and our mode of transaction would be through textbook. We need to be really mapping our curriculum to the curriculum of global citizenship and see how we can blur the disciplinary borders, how we can embrace the transdisciplinary models into the system. And the most important thing in the digital world is to leverage on technology. Here in my research, when I go to schools in urban, suburb, and also rural areas, they are very different. They really are not heterogeneous in their demographic. But what they strongly use is the technology to connect globally, to disseminate their knowledge and share ideas. So one of the things which we have here at Albany in my own department is the global platform, wherein we give opportunities for the school leaders to showcase their ideas about global education and sustainable development. So this can, I'm sure that there are a lot of activities even in India. This has to be leveraged to a level that it is going to a global extent. The practices which we do at local level, it's not just enough to just share it to their small community, but it has to go to a global level. And the next thing is to really grow global leaders. And we always see that when the leaders in the school or any institution change, the DNA of the school system changes, because of the fact that the ideas of global citizenship or sustainable development has not been percolated in all realms of the system. So distribution of leadership is the key. And we need to really see how these elements are in the DNA of the school and also the broader education system. And the last part, the last strategy would be to create global partnership. It is to identify who are your immediate community engagers, who are your immediate stakeholders who can really contribute to your school or to your university or to your college. So that is something which is important. Following these 6 strategies, we can definitely advance global education. And my work as a researcher is also adding on to how can we advance global education at K-12 system. And then these are the major strategies, but within this we have a number of other techniques and strategies where we can closely look at how we can enhance the effectiveness and meaning of global citizenship. Coming to, I'm going to wrap up in another 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Kindly
Yeah.
continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so the common challenges for implementation, which we have seen throughout, is the burden of history. There are two main things when I look at global citizenship education being embraced by the system. One is neoliberal ideas, and the second is new imperialism. So neoliberal ideas actually pushes the education system towards narrow focus on creating students for the market. So the education system is used as a mere tool or an industry or a factory to produce students for a certain job. If, say, for example, there are no jobs for certain skill set, you don't have to teach that in education. But when we look at sustainable development, we are looking at green jobs. We are looking at learning to live together. We are looking at learning for sustainability, inclusion. So we really need to understand the broader political and economical forces which affects education, and we need to be cognizant when we are dealing with the curricular changes. We need to be really aware that these factors affect how we treat curriculum and what we include in our curriculum. Another thing is neo-imperialism. I think coming from the East or the global South, I think that most of the scholars and the educators in the global South think that this is more like a Western idea. Global education citizenship is more like a Western idea because it has been adopted by the powerful global North or the West. But to be very open, vocal about it, this is not a Western idea. This is an idea which we had in India, the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and people in other parts of South Asian countries have in different forms of global citizenship. What is important to identify here is to come out of the colonistic ideas, but to embrace in the indigenous knowledge and skill set of our own. And as our Prime Minister Narendra Modi emphasizes on, we need to really identify the organic indigenous knowledge and skill set which we have within India, within our different cultures, to tackle the global issues and sustainable challenges. And this ideas, this knowledge has to be brought in to the textbooks, to the curriculars, and also the pedagogical practices. And the next common challenge is high-stake testing. So even here in the America, we see that because of high-stake testing, teachers do not delve into the areas of global citizenship education or sustainable development because it is not tested. It's a common and an obvious challenge, but this is something which we really have to think about. How can we bring these elements even into the testing so that, you know, students are not really focused just to get marks or to tackle the test, but to actually embrace these ideas into their lifestyles. And the next thing is the curricular overload. This is one of the greatest challenge we have always had. And I would like to pay more attention to the inequity and curricular engagement. So what does inequity mean in curricular engagement? So when we have a heterogeneous group inside a school or inside an education system, we need to cater to different needs, different demands of the children. They come from a different social capital. A social capital might be a dominant culture, might be a minor culture. So when they are infused in a school system, we see that the curriculum doesn't really treat the differences in an equitable way. We have a common core curriculum and it is given to all students. We need to be able to really personalize, really contextualize based on the context from which students come without robbing their identity. The normal, the normal accusation which is made on the mass schooling is that the diversity, the indigenous identities of people or children are taken away by the dominant culture. We need to be cognizant about how our curricular engagement is embracing diversity than on making one narrative. Than on moving towards singularity. We need to be able to create a democratic, diversified curriculum engagement so that every child feels valued, even though they are coming from a different socio-cultural economic background. They need to be valued with the engagement of curriculum and pedagogy. So coming to the last section of my presentation, the gatekeepers of education. So we need to be really cognizant about what are the effects, what are the influences, the macro political, macro social influences which is on education. If you look at education, of course, education can change the society by socializing process, but we really need to understand that education is being influenced, kind of pulled and pushed and tweaked from different influences, like the political ideas, the social structure. And we also see that in some way, the existing education system is percolating the inequalities. While embracing sustainable ideas, while embracing global citizenship education, we need to be understanding how these forces can be neutralized, or how we can tackle these forces so that the education has its a greater impact. And coming to an end, education cannot do it alone. If we think that education is this magic bullet which can solve all the panacea of the society, we are mistaken. We need to really think about how the complementary conditions are evolved, how the socio-political structures are restructured based on the values and principles of global citizenship and sustainable development. Given that, we can expect the promises which education has made through socialization process. And I would end my presentation with the quote by Rabindranath Tagore on the fear without of mind without fear. And then I always feel that with synergetic action, with the common vision, we can really make a difference through education. And as researchers, as scholars, as practitioners, as educators, or even common people who are a part of education system, really need to rethink about the purpose and aims of education. Thank you so much. And I would put all the things which I have mentioned here on the chat. And if you have any questions, we can take it once we complete this session. Thank you so much.
To sum it up,
Thank you.
To sum it up, what has been discussed so far on education for global citizenship, it is nothing but global brotherhood. Global citizenship is for the global brotherhood, for peace and security and the survival and sustenance of human beings. There are 6 important points that emerged out of the presentations that we made. One is the education for global citizenship aims to develop capability for thoughtful and responsible participation of individuals in global political, economic, social, and cultural life. I think that is the essence, and we need to prepare our students to exercise their leadership at the global level. And the second important point that emerged out of the discussion is global citizenship is a notion that connects humanity beyond the geographical boundaries. And it is the responsibility of the educators to make the notion into an effective action. And the third important point that emerged was global citizenship is a value addition to educational practices. So it is not something that we are deviating for our regular practices, but it is a value addition preparing the individuals for the 21st century. It provides opportunities to connect individuals and their capacities to address global issues and challenges. So every individual takes the responsibility. It is the individual responsibility for global sustenance, peace, and harmony. So the global citizenship education provides opportunities for individuals and their competencies to connect and address the global issues at the larger scale, individually and collectively. And what is most important to make this global citizenship happen in the schools, in the education institutions, is the ethical and intellectual sensitivity, which is a very, very important, and their educators have a role to play. The ethical and intellectual sensitivity is the core of global citizenship education. So educators need to bring global issues in the classroom, and thereby they need to come out of their comfort zones and act as a transformational leaders in the educational setup. Unless and until we accept the responsibility, we cannot really bring transformational change in the educational system. Therefore, what is required at the systems level is to bring a complete awareness about the importance of education for global citizenship. We need to bring a kind of awareness in educators, in our stakeholders, about the need and the key role of global citizenship in the global development. And the second one is develop a kind of acceptance. You know, awareness does not lead to acceptance all the time. Therefore, we need to put efforts to make people understand its need and importance and accept it. So the awareness and acceptance will certainly lead to a productive actions. And those actions are essential to be implemented by educators, and with our concerted efforts, and we can really create that system of education for global citizenship. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Now the presentation is open for discussion. If you have any questions, we would like to address. Thank you.